Dave was heading to Afghanistan on November 11th.
Janice Dickson is the Globe's international affairs reporter. She's talking about Dave Lavery arriving at the Kabul airport.
He had picked up his bags, and then there was a final security screening.
Dave is a veteran who was working with a Canadian charity to help evacuate Afghans who'd supported Canada's mission in the country. He'd been to Afghanistan many times, but this time was different. Janice spoke to Dave about what happened next.
So I'm waiting. There's one guy in there wasting so much time fumbling with his bags, and I was feeling uncomfortable because I felt exposed. I was just getting that feeling, hurry up, because I noticed that there was more presence of security there.
And he noticed one man in particular who was on the phone, and he was talking to somebody, and he was looking at him.
So I was watching him watch me.
And so finally he was able to pick up his bag.
And then as I was moving, he started walking.
He's heading down the hallway that leads to the parking lot, and his wife is waiting there for him.
Kept on walking, but I walked up faster, walked past him. And as I just approached and went around the corner, another guy on the phone was come right then and said, go back, we want to check your bag.
Dave said something like, you've checked my bag. But in any event, they went back down the hallway, and the officials there went straight for the bag that was carrying his laptop. Behind it was an envelope that contained 18 travel documents belonging to Afghans who needed them to leave the country.
Took it out, ripped it, and started grabbing and seeing all the visas.
He also had some of his military garb in his bag because he thought, it's Remembrance Day. Maybe I'll just bring my jacket and throw it on for a photo or whatever.
I'm looking at the visas and I'm just, oh my God, that's it for me.
Dave never made it to the parking lot where his wife was waiting. Instead, he was held by the Taliban for 77 days. After he was released, Janice spoke with Dave at his home in Dubai. Today, she's here to share the story of Dave's detention in Afghanistan and how he got out. I'm Menaka Raman-Wilms, and this is The Decibel from the Globe and Mail. Janice, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Janice, we just went through how Dave Lavery was detained at the Kabul airport this past November. Can you give us a sense, though, of who Dave Lavery is?
Sure. So Dave is 64 years old. He lives in Dubai with his wife, Junping. He was a soldier with the Canadian Armed Forces. He worked for the United Nations. He's got a very lively, sort of gregarious personality, and he's been committed to Afghanistan for many years now. When he was detained, he was doing work for the Veterans Transition Network, a charity based in British Columbia, which helps rescue Afghans who are trying to flee the Taliban. And they have a contract with the Canadian government to help Afghans who had supported the Canadian government's military and diplomatic mission in the country.
So let's talk about some of his work in Afghanistan, because you mentioned he was helping evacuate Afghans, in particular to come to Canada. The Canadian military, of course, has been out of Afghanistan since 2014, but there was a big rush of people trying to leave the country in 2021. Can you just remind us, Janice, what happened there?
Sure. So after the U.S., started pulling out their troops from Afghanistan in the spring and the summer of 2021, a lot of Afghans were really fearful of Taliban reprisals, particularly those who helped and worked for Western governments. And so as the Taliban made rapid gains across the country, this anxiety increased. And then finally on August 15th, the Taliban took control of Kabul. And, I think we can all remember those images of Afghans literally clinging to planes as they're taking off on that day. Just horrifying pictures that show how desperate people were to leave. And so, Dave was on the ground at that time. And even after a lot of help ceased there, he continued on the ground trying to get people to the airport and through the gates and through this chaos. And he and his wife were on one of the final German evacuation flights out of the country. Soon after, there was a suicide bomb at the airport. A lot of people were killed, and he made it out safely. But then he returned. He returned to Afghanistan to continue helping people and to continue his work there.
Yeah. So, like, as you mentioned, Janice, like a lot of people really worried about Taliban reprisals because if they were helping Western governments in the time when the Taliban was not in power, that really puts a target on their back now. So Dave was helping to rescue them. What was his role, I guess, in these kinds of missions?
Right. So he helps with their logistics. He helps them with their, get their travel documents. He picks them up or he gets them from Canadian officials, brings them into the country, helps get them into the hands that they belong to, and then helps arrange people's travel out. So in some cases, that means plane tickets, but more often it means helping them get to the border.
And do we have a sense of how many people Dave has actually helped to evacuate over the years?
Veterans Transition Network said that it's been thousands of people that they've helped together.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like Dave is very familiar with Afghanistan. He's done this trip many times. But then in November when he went, he was stopped at the airport when he arrived. Do we know why he was stopped, Janice?
No, we don't know why. And Dave doesn't know exactly why. He believes that someone may have tipped off the Taliban. They went straight for the documents. They knew what they were looking for. But we don't know exactly why or, who told the Taliban.
And when we're talking about these documents, these are documents that are supposed to help get people out of the country. Was there anything illegal that he was doing by, I guess, bringing those into the country?
Not in his view. It's unclear precisely what the problem was.
Okay. So after Dave has been kind of targeted here at the airport, we know he's detained at the airport. What actually happens after they've gone through his bags and they've decided to not kind of release him?
Yeah, so they lead Dave to a car and they throw him in the back with his bags. They tied a big scarf around his head and his hands, I believe. And then they led him to the GDI, the General Directorate of Intelligence headquarters. And, Dave can't see, obviously, but he said that he put the window down a little bit to see, in case someone could spot him. And then in his mind, he was thinking about where they could possibly be taking him. And then ultimately they took him to the GDI headquarters.
And when we say the GDI, the General Directorate of Intelligence, is that the Taliban then?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And so while this is happening, Janice, of course, his wife she's at the airport. She's waiting to pick him up in the parking lot. What does she do?
Well, she's panicking because at this point it's taken way too long for him to come out. And so she gets in touch with Dave's son, Brant, and starts saying, he's still not here. And she spends 3 hours at the airport searching for him. She's showing people his picture. And then eventually someone said, the GDI have him. And so she goes to her friend's house. And meanwhile, Brant is telling her, you need to leave the country immediately because your safety is now in danger. And she really didn't want to leave. Like, she did not want to leave until she had Dave. She was just very anxious, to say the least. But the next morning she left on the first flight, and it's great that she did because the Taliban showed up at her friend's house looking for her the next day.
We'll be right back. Okay, so Dave has been detained by the Taliban. How soon do people start to get wind of this? Like the Canadian government in particular, when do they find out that this has happened?
Brant was behind the scenes, working the phone, telling everybody that he could. And of course, because Dave was doing this work, bringing in documents, the Canadian government was well aware of what he was doing and his plans. And so they knew pretty soon after that he had been taken.
And we know that the Taliban took him to the GDI initially. Do we know then what happens to Dave?
Well, first of all, he said that being sort of pushed around and led to different places with his head covered was, so disoriented, not knowing where you're headed. And almost immediately he started playing up that he was this older man, that he was injured. He does have a hip injury. And so he was really sort of leaning into that because he was thinking, I need to get to the hospital. I know people there. So that was that was sort of his mindset as he's first getting led into this building. And so he's brought to a cell. It was in a basement. It had an old, thin, red industrial carpet. He wrote all of this down after the fact. So when he's in the cell, he doesn't have, a pen or paper, obviously, but later he gets one. And so some of these details that he shared with me, he's reading from a journal. So I asked him to read out a description of this place, and he said,
4.5 meter room by 6.5 meter room by 3.5 meter high, with a little narrow window with 2 windows that open, and a little mat for a bed, that's been used for years and is filthy and covered in, I don't want to tell you, and on just a concrete floor with an industrial thin red carpet, a little plastic red cup with a water bottle and one door in, and a CCTV camera.
So yeah, this is where he spent 28 days.
Wow.
He said his day usually started around 5:30 a.m., where he was allowed a very quick shower. And he said he had a tiny towel. So basically he would shower and then put his clothes on, which became soaked. And he had the same clothes this whole time. He wasn't given a toothbrush or toothpaste. Ultimately he became pretty sick in this cell. It was pretty rough. And then he was also interrogated a few times, asked about the documents, asked if he worked for the Canadian government. He talked a lot about what he did to survive the 28 days in captivity. And one thing he talked about was a dream that he had, a very vivid dream that basically was an escape and then eventually seeing family. And so he said he would return to this dream, whenever he kind of went to a dark place, and he used it to cope. So he would break up the dream into episodes in his mind and play them over and over again and sort of visualize, as an escape, essentially.
Wow. Okay. So he's in a pretty difficult situation there. And Janice, you mentioned he's there for 28 days. He's detained for much longer than that, though, right? So what happens after that?
Eventually, they take him to the hospital, and he's really sick at this point. So they take him to the hospital, and he undergoes a number of tests. And then, he's blindfolded, brought back to the car, but he can tell that he's being taken to a different location. And so then he's brought to a guest house, and he gets to this place, and there's actually American captives there. And when he gets there, they actually say to him, "We know about you," because they saw on the news that he had been detained. And so he gets to know these other Americans, and he's sharing a room with an American. Everything sort of improves, from meals to his quality of life day to day. He went from being in a cell by himself in sort of these horrifying conditions to a house. It's a massive upgrade when you're talking about conditions of captivity.
Yeah. And then he's actually moved another time, isn't he?
Yeah. So this is probably the biggest surprise, is that he's ultimately moved to his own home, the very villa that he has been renting for a long time in Kabul. And so he's blindfolded and brought into the car, brought to his home, and he's basically under house arrest there.
Okay, so now he's in his own home, different conditions again. What's the situation like, though? How close is he being guarded? What are his days like?
Yeah, so he still has a number of guards there. Electricity was an issue, but generally his conditions were much better. He's in his own environment. He's able to cook. He's finding all kinds of food in the freezer. And, he made this incredible soup that he talked about. He was able to use his gym. He rearranged his furniture. He spent a lot of time cleaning. He still was obviously thinking about his family constantly. That was definitely the most painful part of this experience for him. But his physical conditions improved greatly when he was in his own home.
Was he able to get in contact with his family at any point?
Yes. So the first time he was able to talk to his family was on December 30th. So they allow him a phone call. He said it was 15, 17 minutes, something like that. They brought him to the Minister of Foreign Affairs office. A representative brought him there. And of course, he's guarded during this phone call. So he's going to be careful about what he says.
It was a good feeling, but it was hard. It was very emotional because when you're doing this call, you have, the representative of the Minister of Foreign Affairs holding the phone like this. You have security guards.
He talked to Jinping, his wife, and he was so grateful that she made it out, and knowing that she made it out because he knew that she was waiting for him at the airport. And so this phone call was so important because he heard her voice and knew that she was safe. And Jinping, I spoke with her as well, and she was shocked. And so, yeah, it was a really emotional phone call. And he kept saying to them, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And he said his son Brant was amazing, saying, don't say sorry, you didn't do anything wrong, you need to concentrate, because he was still being held, and, he wanted his dad to stay focused.
Yeah. And during that time, was his family trying to get in touch with him, trying to find out what was going on?
So they were obviously doing everything that they could, but Jinping, she texted him every single day. Sometimes, she shared these messages with me, and they would be, in the wee hours of the night or very early in the morning. I don't think she slept at all. She was so worried about him.
So even though he didn't have access to his phone, she's still texting him every day, just in case.
She did. She texted him every single day. On day 2, for instance, she says, "You are gone missing. I hope they're nice to you, husband," with a heart. "All the best, husband. Love you so much." Then on day 4, she says, "Are you okay, husband? Stay strong and do your workout. Stay positive. I'm here with you. Everything will be okay. Husband, I'm most worried about your health." And then as the time goes on, she gets angry. Day 47, Saturday, 28 December. "Too long for you and too long for me, husband. Time did not let me change. Time let me become more and more afraid. I dare not imagine how you spent this period of time. My head hurts badly." And she's asking him, "What can I do? How can we help you?" Clearly, as time goes on, she's becoming increasingly desperate.
Yeah. And you can really hear the emotion in those messages, right? That how difficult this is for her. And I imagine it must have been very difficult on the other end for Dave too, right? Janice, do we have a sense of how Dave coped?
He said that when he was at this villa,
I'd go up on the roof when it was cold in the villa, and when I was by myself, and I'd look at that moon, and I would talk to that moon. And I knew if my family were looking at that moon, they might be able to hear me.
I asked him, what did you tell the moon? And he said that he was trying to be positive, saying, "Hey guys, I'm in Villa 1. That's his home there. I'm on the rooftop. I'm staying fit. I just made the best chicken soup in the world. Actually gained a few pounds." He said he was trying not to be hard on himself and letting them know that he had positive energy. Also letting them know that, he knows that he's screwed up in many ways, but that they'd figure it out and make things better.
So he's detained for 77 days, Janice. And then finally, in late January, he learns that he is being released. What happened?
So first, he's actually able to make a secret phone call because he finds an old cell phone in the villa. He was later able to get cell phone chargers that were in his bag that the Taliban eventually brought to him.
They brought my personal bag, my backpack, and in it I had some, all the power banks and all that. And I'm going, maybe one of these little things will work. I plug it in beside the bed stamp and all that. And then all of a sudden it started lighting up. And beep, beep, beep. I'm freaking out trying to turn the thing off.
Oh my gosh.
I'm going, it's got 4G, 4G. Oh my God. So I put it away, and that night I'm waiting till all the guards tuck me in and all that in my room. They go downstairs. So I'm up there, and I'm now very excited. I think it was the 22nd of January. So I'm under the covers, And it, I'm like, holy God. And then, hello? And I go, Brent, it's your dad.
And then his son is actually able to say, we were in Doha waiting for you. We're in Dubai now, because there was sort of a false start to his eventual rescue. Around the middle of January, it really looked like he was going to be freed, and something happened, and nobody seems to know what. But his family was actually waiting for him in Doha for some time, and it didn't pan out. And so then eventually the Taliban guards tell him that their boss, wants to speak with him. He has a phone call and they say, Dave, you're going home tomorrow. Like, he found out one evening, and
Wow.
the very next day he was going to leave. And so he was taken to the airport, and then he flew to Qatar, and he said it was surreal. He really didn't believe it until he was landing. And actually, he described going down the staircase onto the tarmac, and there were all these people there. And he thought, gosh, there must have been someone really important on the plane. He had no idea that the welcoming committee was actually for him. Huh. And he sees his wife's head, then he sees his son. And he said that in that moment, he felt like, this is real. Like, I'm finally with my family. He said that when his wife hugged him, it was like she was never, ever going to let go.
She's jumping on me and crying emotion, and it's making me, I don't want to break down and go crazy, but it was very emotional.
Do we know, Janice, who secured his release or how this was negotiated?
No, we really don't know the nitty-gritty details. I mean, of course, we know that that Qatar and the Canadian government was involved, but we don't know exactly how things unfolded that led to Dave's release. And, the Americans that were held captive, there are some that still are. There are a few or a couple that have been released, and they had been held much longer than Dave. And Dave will be the first to point out that 77 days is a long time. But in the grand scheme of things, things moved much faster for him than some others who are detained.
And Janice, you had a chance to actually visit Dave and Junping, his wife, this past month in Dubai. How is he doing?
It was an emotional meeting. I think because I was there so soon after he had been released, and he and Junping had only actually been home together for a few days, that through the course of this interview, it seemed like they were even learning information about one another's experience for the first time. And it was really clear how hard it was for them to be separated. Definitely just really, really hard.
So just lastly, Janice, we talked about how Dave was traveling with documents for Afghans who were trying to leave the country. This is when he was detained. He had these documents in his bag. Do we know, were those people ever actually able to leave the country?
Yeah, actually, Dave said that despite him being detained, his team was still able to move the family out of the country and onward to safety. That's a happy aspect of the story.
Janice, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's it for today. I'm Menaka Raman-Wilms. Our intern is Amber Ranson. Our producers are Madeline White, Michal Stein, and Ali Graham. David Crosby edits the show. Adrian Chung is our senior producer, and Matt Frainer is our managing editor. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.